Hey, welcome back to the 7-Figure Music School podcast. I'm Daniel. This is Nate. This show exists for a simple reason. We believe you can build a music school that changes lives and makes a good living. And this episode today is in response to last week's episode. We had so much fun just creating a simple episode around a simple topic of financial fluency that we thought, hey, let's make another one that goes over a simple process that people can add, or a school owner can add into their weekly rhythm, their daily rhythm. Oftentimes, the mistake that Nate and I make is thinking that we have to have some kind of high, lofty, massive concept, when in reality, what folks actually need are these, simple habits. And so I do think there's a good reason to do both kinds of episodes. But we just thought, let's make this basic. Let's make this simple. Let's go a little bit longer on financial fluency, because it's something that Nate and I have been thinking a lot recently, because that's what we're working on with the folks in the Founders Forum. And so, that's what we're doing here today, Nate. So tell me, what is it that's on your mind about financial fluency?
We are looking at, and we do this, I love this part of the Founders Forum, as we try to introduce really every month a new CEO habit or founder's habit, right? And definitely one of the habits that we are introducing here is this notion of how to look at reporting on the financial side of things, right, within your business in some kind of regular rhythm.
Okay.
Dig it?
Before everyone turns off the podcast, tell me, why is this important?
Yeah, so many of you are like, no, numbers, I'm done. Thank you very much. I'm out. Why is it so important? For the simple reason that we've talked about many times, that you have different fuels that run your studio. The most important fuel, of course, is your intention and creativity around why you built what you built, sort of the purpose. The second most valuable resource that you have that you're using is your time. We're gonna put out a great episode in the future here on when you're spending your too much time or too little time on the wrong things or the right things. We have a great episode coming up on time. But the third resource that you are allocating and investing every day in your studio are dollars. And so the reason why you need to have some kind of weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual rhythm of looking at reports on your money is because you cannot run out of it. You need to make sure that your studio is pulling enough cash for what you personally need for you and your family. And you need to make sure that your studio is pulling enough cash and invested in the right things so that that studio will continue to grow and will continue to thrive. So that is the simple reason. If you are winging it, the likelihood of you running out of cash goes way up. And that's why I just heard this week that of 100 businesses, small businesses that will open this year or this week, let's say, in America, Daniel, how many of them will not be around, do you think, in 5 years?
I believe the statistic is 80%.
Yeah, you're very close. I heard it was 90. So there's only 10 businesses remaining out after 5 years, right?
Out of 100. Yeah.
Yes. How many do you think will still be around in 10 years?
Oh, I don't know this number. What is it?
One of those 100 will still be thriving 10 years from now. I'm talking to our listeners now. Well, I'm also talking to us, Daniel.
Yeah, right.
But you who have opened this music school and this studio from your heart with a very clear purpose and a desire, you want to be that 1 in 100 that is absolutely still functioning 10 years from now. So that is why today's episode is so important.
I love it. Now, last week, we talked about plain and simple budgeting, and we're not going to retread that topic. What we're going to talk about today are some money habits you should have on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. Practical things you can do. Now, my hope in talking about this is to cause a little bit of a crisis because we are going to tell you what to do. And as you hear these things, some thoughts might go through your head like, wait, what was that word he just said? I've never even heard that word before. Or, wait, I couldn't do that. I don't have that kind of time. Or, oh, I can't do that. I don't even know where I would get that information. Or, I can't do that. That doesn't even apply to me because we don't even have enough profit to make that make sense. Like, what the point of this is to set an expectation as to what is normal. So there is a normalization aspect to us talking about these things. And hopefully it causes a little bit of a crisis because it's like, oh, yeah, we're telling you what to do, but you might have to grow into some of these habits.
Yes.
Self-education or a different way of doing things, maybe being a little bit more organized. What I promise you, though, is that these habits are very well thought out. We are not asking you to become an accountant here. This is the bare minimum that someone who's running a business should be doing. So we are not trying to put an extra burden on you. And as we often say, if you don't think you have time to do these things, the reason why you're fighting all the fires that you're fighting is because you're not doing these things. So trade the fires for peace. And there is peace in these simple habits, which, by the way, you might have to do yourself at first, but eventually you can delegate them to other people. Nate, let's start.
Okay.
What should we be collecting, logging, and reviewing on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual basis? Let's go. Let's start with daily.
Daily. It's really simple. Your studio requires buying things. You absolutely 100% need to have some version of a software that you are categorizing your expenses in. Some schools, when they first start out, will just have a Google Sheet or something like that. But I highly recommend subscribing to QuickBooks Online or Xero. But QuickBooks Online is great. It's the industry standard. Your expenses are going to come into there daily. You need to categorize them. You need to say, oh, I bought a bunch of piano books for my students. This goes under teaching supplies. So that is your daily action. And if I have my QuickBooks Online account right here, I'm looking at the transaction tab and it's showing me exactly. We have 15 purchases that happened, say in the last day or two, and they all hit our Chase credit card. Those need to be reconciled. We have 3 in another bank account in Citibank. Those need to be reconciled. At this stage of the game in Brooklyn Music Factory, this is exactly something that I have delegated elsewhere, right? Plus, with AI and all these things, it's becoming stupidly easy to reconcile your expenses.
Question.
Yeah.
Why daily?
Well, if you're in the first 3, let's say you're in the 3 to 5 year range of your school,
or you've never done this before,
or you've never done this before, because you are raising awareness and clarity on where you're investing your money, and it's just the simple action. This is why, like, when you're 25 and you've just been winging it in life financially, you figure as long as you can still make your rent and head to Kroger's and buy your groceries, you're doing great. This is why when you first get the bomb drop that you need a budget and you're like, wait, what even is that? The initial practice of developing a personal financial budget is literally just tracking what you're spending money on. Because that's it. You're just raising awareness. You're like, I had no idea that I spent $128 every month or every week on coffee, or every day if you live in Brooklyn on coffee.
I look forward to being in Brooklyn, going to the Bean Monger again.
Totally.
So for those of you who maybe get a little bummed out looking at only expenses, you could also look at the income coming in every day as well, and be aware of that as well. So let's be a little positive there, Nate.
I mean, you are. Sorry, when I say you're only reconciling expenses, is because that's the area where there's most avoidance.
Yes.
Right? Most of us avoid even the idea that it costs money to run the thing. So 100%, Daniel.
Yeah.
Also look at where you're making your money.
Now, I love that Nate already highlighted this point, that he has now delegated this to a team member at BMF. I also know that you and Leah kind of go over these things on a monthly basis. I'm sure we're going to talk about that soon. I will also just say that for me, at the stage of career that I'm at now, my reconciliation comes on a monthly basis, and I have someone who tabulates all that for me, and then I just look at it at the end of the month. But I do go line by line and look at every single transaction for the entire month, and it provides that for me as well, and it's all pre-categorized for me, so I see where it is. Sometimes I'll send little adjustments back to my guy, be like, no, this was miscategorized, it should be in this. Or he might have a question for me, what was this transaction? I've never seen this vendor before, or anything like that. So yeah, this reconciliation habit keeps you very up close and personal with the finances of the business.
You made a really important point there when you said your guy, your bookkeeper comes back and says, hey, I need clarity. You bought X. What category do you want me to put it in? The categorization of your business, of your music school, and where you invest your limited resources is an essential learning curve. It used to be that I'd get super annoyed when our bookkeeper would come back to us and ask me like what I wrote this check for. And then I realized that the reason he's doing that is because he wants to make sure we have a well-organized, well-maintained business, right? And so it's not that they're bothering you or me, Daniel. It's that they're saying, hey, we want to create a clear and simple view on the financial picture of our business. So, for example, you don't want them putting all those piano books you bought for your group, piano program. You don't want them putting that in your travel expense line or the rent line or randomness just because they have no idea what a piano book's for. They don't need to know. You need to educate them. Okay. Onward.
Well, before we go onward, I'll just give a little bonus. I'll give a little bonus about reconciliation. Nate talks about the money aspect and where that's going to and the categorizational importance of that. I blew the minds of some school owners recently when I showed them how my team tracks their usage of not money, but time, and how detailed we are with the usage of time. So you could also reconcile time reports, because I actually have all my team members categorize their time by the project that they're working on. And so I can see where the time / money is going to. We're investing money in their hours, and we're seeing where that money is going to. So it's not just, this team member, we paid this much per month. How much of that was spent on Piano Express versus getting this podcast produced? How much of that money was spent on marketing versus admin or just maintenance of our systems? So that's a bonus for those of you who feel like, I reconcile. This is too easy. We're gonna drop some little bonus tips here for you as we go throughout the episode.
This episode is sponsored by BigMusicGames.com. As our listeners know, Brooklyn Music Factory is all about a fun, fluency-first approach to music lessons. And at the foundation of our teaching methods are rhythm, melody, harmony, and songwriting games that challenge students as young as 4 years old to train their ears and flex that musical mind. Because when you set an intention of gamifying every single lesson, you're going to find improved attendance, increased play at home, and higher student retention. So we've set up a website just for our listeners so you can start playing today. Go to bigmusicgames.com/7FMS and create your free account. Again, that's bigmusicgames.com/7FMS. And if you join today, I'm going to send you a personal invite to join our weekly teacher training call with me and Greggy Bizzle, our chief game designer. Go ahead and put play back into practice with Big Music Games. What should you look at weekly? Shall I dive straight in there, Daniel?
Yeah, without getting too nerdy, let's figure it out.
Okay, I'm going to try. So again, these are all what we would call simple reports. They may not be easy to set up initially. These are things that we provide in the Founders Forum. These are things that are really essential, yet what I want you to walk away with today are the principles behind each thing we look at. That's the key, because you can build it yourself. You don't need somebody else's template, but the reality is time is one of our, is the second most valuable resource we have. So we save a lot of time by using others' templates that have done it well before.
And not only are we giving kind of the templates that you have created for BMF, I will just point out that in the Founders Forum, the templates that we're giving, they really are tailor made for people who are in our industry. So
Yes,
yeah, you can
that's the
probably go
key.
out and find some of these reports, general things, but it's kind of the instruction and a lot of the hands-on done with you work that we're doing in the forum that makes this so valuable. Man, I wish I'd had something like this back in the day. But
Yeah.
anyway, let's talk about these, Nate.
Okay. So weekly, the first thing we're looking at is what we call a year-to-date health report, and I literally just pulled this up. Just to be clear, this is again something that only recently, actually, I delegated this to team, but it is filled out every Wednesday for me. So I got, what day of the week are we on? Oh, we're recording this on a Friday. So I just got an updated version within the last 24 hours. And I get it every week updated. The year to date health report shows very simply your cost of labor year to date, your total expenses year to date. So that's cost of labor plus the expense line of running your school, and then your total revenue year to date, and then finally your total revenue by product broken down year to date. Brooklyn Music Factory categorizes using, let's see here, 5 different products, and then also total expenses broken down by cost of labor and cost of labor plus administrative expenses. So that's the year to date. Why is that so valuable? Is because there are 2 columns. There's year to date in the current year, Daniel, and there's year to date in the previous year. So I'm just going to give you a real quick example for our listeners. Total revenue from the current year at Brooklyn Music Factory reads at $468,000. Total revenue year to date in the previous year was $428,000. And then that shows me in the third column the percentage difference. So year to date, we show a 9% growth in gross revenue. So this year to date report, I am looking at every single week because we have forecasted, I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but we have forecasted where we expect to be by the end of this year. And I am tracking every single week to make sure that we are on target, both in our investments or expenses and on target in terms of the 5 different products that we are selling and growing. That's the year to date report. So I'm sure Daniel is going to be like, wait, hold on, Nate. Why is this important? So I'm just gonna get out in front of it. This is essential because you, as the founder, have just a few responsibilities. But one of the most important responsibilities is that you're setting the vision.
Love it.
And that you are growing, you are making sure that you're allocating resources accurately to achieve the goals of that vision. And one part of your vision is going to be financial. You are going to set a vision of, I want to grow this school from, say, $300,000 a year to $400,000 a year, which would be an amazing growth in a year. That would be a rock solid growth for a school, right? So I want to grow by $100,000 this year. And then your part of your job is to make sure that at regular intervals, for me, at a multi 7-figure, at a $2 million business, I'm checking that sucker every week. Because if things start to veer off path, I can adjust, right? And it's so important that us as founders remember that we need a way to measure whether we're keeping the boat heading exactly the right direction, because there's only one point that we're heading towards. Like, we're leaving the shore and heading out to sea. We are trying to arrive specifically at this port. And so one of the ways we measure whether we're arriving there is through that financial year to date report.
Nate, quick question.
Yeah.
Because some of the things you're talking about here definitely are things that we are tracking. All of this can fit on a single dashboard. Some of these things that you're talking about, where you can see these numbers on whatever reporting frequency you want, whether it's weekly or monthly, or if you're really crazy, daily if you want. Is this correct? Do you
Yeah,
feel that's
dude.
true?
I'm looking at my Google Sheet right now. This sucker lives in a Google Sheet. There's nothing sexy about it. It is 9 rows of a Google Sheet, what I just described. And I just described a 4-column version of it. So 9 rows and 4 columns. If you want to pause the podcast right now and quickly try to design that Google Sheet, it'll take you less than 3 minutes.
Yes. Now, the pushback is what I would say is that it is kind of sexy because if you combine the data with understanding as to what the data means, in other words, the story that the data is telling you, it will give you such a clear picture of the health of the business, the growth potential of the business, the opportunities you have, that I don't know, that's a very attractive thing to me. The idea that I can just capture all of that. I know I'm being a little oppositional. That's not really my point. I'm just saying that, like, the point I'm really trying to highlight here is that it is not just the numbers. That is not why people avoid this. It's because they collect the numbers and they're like, okay, but what does this mean? And again, not to put too fine a point on it, we get these kinds of questions, even from pretty sophisticated school owners inside the forum. And just to have access to the genius that is Nate Shaw, who can just be like, oh, here's your numbers. Here's stories that I see in this. And then I'm just watching these school owners be like, oh, I had no idea. Like, Nate is training them how to think, because this is such a zone of genius for Nate.
Can I give you an example of I'm literally looking at the report that BMF got today. I just opened it up this morning before I went to the gym and did a quick. So here's a great story and trend you can look at it. So our gross revenue has grown 9% year over year, and our cost of labor has shrunk 7% year over year.
That's awesome.
So the trend I'm seeing here is a really positive one, because we've increased salaries actually and hourly wages for all of our teachers, but we have been more surgical as to when we bring them in for certain events that are non-teaching hours, if that makes sense. So the story I see here is, okay, we're making choices. Our cost of labor is going down while our gross revenue, at least year to date, is up, which means we are doing more with less. And that is the fundamental goal of any business owner, right? We want to serve our customers in more valuable ways, but by doing fewer actions and in having to invest less money to get it done, right? And so that's a perfect example of me seeing doing more for less. So that's just Win Micro. I'm going to continue on what we need to do. Weekly. Honestly, for me, that is it. Actually, I just look at my year to date. I thought I was going to suggest something else, but no. At this time in the life of Brooklyn Music Factory, that's the one report that I will look at every week without fail. So I think we can go on to a monthly at this point.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So monthly, we have a few different areas that we want to pay attention. Okay. So you've been looking at this year-to-date health report. Of course, each month there's going to be a week where you look at that, right? Previous month and year-to-date budget versus actual report is what you're going to look at next. So if I'm in QuickBooks right now, I can literally go to the reports page, standard reports, I can pull up something called a budget versus actual. That, of course, assumes that you have created a budget, which we're not talking about today, but we have had good episodes.
Just the last one was budgeting, plain and simple.
We have great episodes just as recently as 7 days ago. Okay, so, but that budget versus actual is huge, because what you're doing is you're just saying like, I said that I was going to make $40,000 this month in income. And when I say you're looking monthly at your budget versus actual, what you're actually doing is it's like the 5th of the month, and you're looking at the previous month, because it always takes about 5 extra days to close all the books on the previous month. So you're looking at the previous month and you're saying, did I make as much money as I forecasted making? I budgeted making $40,000, but I made $42,000. Great. So I made 100 and X% of that goal. And then I'm also going down and I'm looking at my cost of labor, same thing. And then I'm also going down and looking at that administrative expense, marketing and sales expense below the line, and going literally line by line. We just talked about categorizing expenses. Well, here's where you really get a reward on that. You're just looking at each category line and you're saying, okay, cool. I thought I was going to spend $200 last month on teaching supplies, but I actually spent $500 on teaching supplies. Oh, dig it. So the purpose of that budget versus actual, and the reason why you need to look at it every month is because this is where you can start making those strategic adjustments for the remainder of the year. So let's say, you're in March and you're looking back at January and February, and you've noticed that a certain line is trending over budget consistently. Well, this is exactly when I would go, okay, wait a minute. Is that a trend that's going to continue? In which case I need to allocate more resources, for example, to teaching supplies for the rest of the year. Or was that just a blip? It was the beginning of a semester, so we spent a bunch, but we should be fine. We're not going to spend as much the rest of the year. But let's say you do need to allocate more. If you do, then you need to look elsewhere on your budget to take money from, right? That's the key. Right? It isn't just, you're not constantly adding. It's sort of like when you're mixing music. One of the key mistakes, Daniel, that people make in the studio when they're mixing their record is they're like, I need to hear more guitar. So they turn the guitar up. What you actually need to do, of course, is turn everything down around it. Or you need to make sure you're right. So the goal is always that. You need to make sure you're taking from another line to make sure that teaching supply will go out. So that budget versus actual is valuable for that reason. And the reason why you have to look at it every month is if you wait 6 months to look at it, it may be too late to adjust with only 6 months remaining in your annual budget. So that's why we look at it monthly. There's only two other things that I look at every month. The second thing I look at is the cash flow report. So let's say and we build that into our budget versus actual and our forecast report. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. But basically what a cash flow report says is, okay, you said you were going to make $40,000 a month. You're 2 months into the year. So you anticipated making $80,000 and maybe you only made $76,000. Okay. Well, you anticipated spending $58,000 to make that $76,000. And when you look at that report, your cash flow says, well, here's what you anticipated. You anticipated that you would have $14,000 in cash left over. You thought you were going to make 80, you spent 56, so you thought you were going to have 14,000 left over. Well, actually, I think if I'm remembering the numbers I threw out correctly, you now, because you made less than you anticipated and you spent 56, you've got $12,000 left over. That's if everything worked out exactly as you budgeted. But in fact, you overspent in certain lines. So now you only have $8,000 in cash actually left over. So your cash flow report is basically showing you what you really have left in the bank to spend on the next month, right? So it's the money you anticipate making plus the cash left over equals your resource moving forward. So the cash flow report is something that takes effort to make sure that you're always looking at. You have to make sure that you're actually building a system so you can track your cash well. QuickBooks Online, again, has a version of a cash flow report, so get in there and study the tool. It's not having the tool that matters, Daniel, as we talked about. It's how well you know how to use the tool that matters. So have fewer tools in your toolbox, but know how to use them well. So I look at the cash flow report, and Leah and I I have Leah's eyes look at this as well, my bookkeeper, and so that I don't screw this up because cash is king. You cannot run out of cash. Your teachers have to get paid. Otherwise, they will not show up. You can ask for forgiveness for one payroll period, maybe two at most, but eventually they're all going to leave, and they are your most important asset. You
Right.
know what I mean? So don't run
100%.
out of cash.
Yeah.
Last report that I look at monthly is what we call a payroll report. This gives us a clear look at exactly the number of hours and the percentage those hours make up of total payroll hours spent that are going to teaching. And for us, it's in each teaching department: private lessons, camp, group lessons. We even track birthday parties. And we also track how many of our payroll hours go to meetings that we require teachers and staff to come to, as well as administrative. So the payroll report actually is similar to your time tracking report, Daniel. It's serving the same purpose. Dig it? So I would say that's all I have to say about that, except for that is a very important report as you move towards annual planning and trying to get strategic as to where you want to allocate hours that your total payroll indicates you're spending. So,
yeah. I want to just jump in here and say that agree with everything you're saying here. Wasn't even entirely sure everything you were going to say here, but I'm thinking, oh yeah, I do that, I do that, I do that.
yep.
I think my favorite report, and I know you talked about this in the weekly, but it's going to come up again, I bet, in your final 2 points here, which I think are going to be shorter. I think my favorite report is income by product. I like just seeing the what each product in my business or businesses are bringing in, and then kind of comparing that to the time we're spending on those. Compare that how we're allocating marketing dollars for each of those products, how we're allocating time for those, and it just gives me a better way of thinking about it than just this flat number of, oh, the business made X number of dollars this month. And it is just shocking to me the number of schools I've worked with where they don't even have it broken down that way. It's a surprisingly high percentage where I tell them, no, how much do you make on piano lessons? How much do you make on, your camps? Well, let's see. We have this many students in piano. No, I didn't ask you how many students you had. I asked how many dollars are coming into the school because of that.
Yes.
It's very important to kind of break it down in this way. So I just wanted to highlight that. It's my favorite report.
You can't actually know where you're going to go next if you can't measure where you're starting from. So often we're just like, I just make money. That's what I do. But it's like you want to break it down. I mean, to be really frank, it's like my personal income is broken down by the different businesses that I'm a part of. Right. And I'm like, I want this percentage to come from this, and I want this percentage to come from that, and this percentage to come from that. And then it helps me understand how to allocate my time to each one of those businesses. So it's the same within your music school.
One of the products that you can put into your music school's income by product report is the Piano Express program. And I have not done a live talk about this for a while, but I will just say this is a great time of year to be thinking about that and both big music games. But I want to highlight one particular thing. If you go to grouplessons.com and you go to the pricing page, we have a calculator there that will show you can plug in how many piano students you have. You can plug in how many teachers you have, what you pay those teachers, and it will show you the expense versus income differential that Piano Express can deliver to your school. And we've had schools that run our full model experience up to a 91% reduction in staff cost and 85% reduction in teaching time needed to deliver instruction to all those students. The calculator shows you this. The flip side of this coin, or the I can't believe this is true part of this coin too, is that we've also done studies on how fast kids move through their books and how much material they retain and the quality they play with. And when you switch to Piano Express, the amount of time that it takes students to get through their books and the beginning stages of piano actually goes down significantly. So it isn't as if you're trading quality for money. You can actually have both. You can have your cake and eat it too. And I've always said, what's the point of having cake if you can't eat it? So Just keep in mind that if this is a great time of year to start setting this up for your fall
Yeah.
semester, go to
Yeah.
grouplessons.com, check out the demo. I just admonish folks that you are seriously missing out if you're not employing this program in your school.
Well,
Okay, Nate.
and it's a perfect segue to the quarterly report that I look at,
Nice.
right? Which is a budget versus actual report. We've talked about that, but I spend more time focusing in specific areas. So first, we just talked about income by product, but then I make Leah and I have a great template that we use, which is a cost of labor by product. So, for example, if we get back to your group lessons opportunity, so your Piano Express, you run a mini keys program or a Jam Band 101 program, anything like that, anything where you have multiple humans in a room, you're going to show better cost of labor, i.e., a lower percentage of every dollar is going towards that direct cost of teaching expenses. So that is baked into this quarterly report. I study very closely the trends, i.e., of every dollar that we make in the private lesson program versus the camp program versus the group lessons program. How much of every dollar is going to the direct expense of the teacher delivering the service? And it's not that I don't really value those teachers and want to pay them well. It's just that I want to make sure that the percentage of every dollar isn't trending the wrong direction. It isn't just sort of like hockey sticking up, right? I'm watching that very carefully. So the quarterly version of my budget versus actual is I get very clear on how much we're making by the income by product, the cost of labor by product, and then in the last line is I look very closely at the administrative expense to run the school, right? So what percentage of every dollar is going to our amazing team that operates this school, including like my wife, Jessica, who's the director of families and communication, really the school manager. And there's a whole number of people that are on the staff that aren't teaching. And I want to make sure that that line item is not also getting wackadoodle. It should trend and be very clear along what I forecasted it to be. So that's my quarterly report. There's nothing really beyond that, which brings us to annually. What do we do? So I want to highlight this before I close out this episode by talking about annually what we do, what we look at, and then how we organize reports. You'll notice that there aren't very many reports that I look at. And that's because you absolutely need to do what my English teacher said to me back in, I think, 7th grade. Wow. Miss Nunez, she said, "Kiss. Keep it simple, stupid." Like when you're writing, make sure you're very focused and simple and you're on point, which can be difficult for me, as we've discovered in podcast episodes. But with financial awareness and fluency, you want to be very simple. You want only the right number of reports to look at, and you want to show up consistently to the habit of looking at those handful of reports. It doesn't mean that I don't go down a really deep analytical hole periodically when I'm making larger and long-term strategic choices. But this episode is about how few reports you need and how often you need to adopt those habits to look at those reports. That's what this episode is about. So like you teed it up, Daniel, this is the baseline. This is like what my meditation teacher says is my floor. You never do less than this on any given day.
Yeah.
Don't go below that floor, right? Just figure out how to do your version of it, warts and all. Remember, done is better than perfect. Just get some version of these. If you need help, obviously you can reach out to us. That's why we're here. This podcast is literally for one reason. That's to benefit you. So let's go to annual reports. Again, yes. I'm looking at the budget versus actual, but now it's the entire year, right? I'm looking at the whole year and saying, how accurate was I in my forecast and my budget?
And again, if you've been consistent in keeping this habit up of tracking this or putting it into the spreadsheet or having a team input in the spreadsheet, looking at this might take you all of 15 seconds.
Yeah. And you're going to, the difference is you're now looking at it with the eyes of someone who's shown up every month to this budget versus actual, so that you're going to have very little surprises, as you just pointed out.
Yeah.
Right. So the budget versus actual is huge. You want to see in a percentage way how accurate you were. The next thing I'm looking at is my historical income statement. So basically what we do is we organize the last 3 years of actuals, and then we look at the trend from a percentage standpoint and a dollar standpoint. But as we teach in the forum, it's all about percentages, right? That way, a $2 million school can talk to a $200,000 school, and it's a very simple and easy conversation to have, right? But you're looking at your 3-year historical, and you're looking at the trends. So that is a really important piece. So what I mean by that is, if I anticipated that in the last year I was going to grow by 25% in my private lesson department, then I look at that historical report and say, well, what have I done over the last 3 years? And let's say I missed the mark. I only grew by 20%, but historically I had actually only grown by about 12%, 15%, and 18% year over year. Then I look at that 20% growth goal or growth achieved in the last year might actually have been right in line with what I've historically been able to do. So then you sort of release some of that tension of I'm a failure. How come I didn't achieve that goal? And that historical income statement is so valuable for that. Of course, in the historicals, the trends I'm looking at are, like I said, income. I'm looking at cost of labor, historical trends. I'm looking at every line in the every expense line for trends. And then obviously the bottom line is your net income. I'm looking at that because that's the thing. At the end of the day, that's the trend that everybody's trying to improve on, right? Are you netting a little bit more year over every year? And then the last report that I look at annually is the 1 and 3 year forecast. And essentially, the 1 and 3 year forecast is like the episode we recorded last week on budgeting done simple, but you're looking further in the future and you're doing it with more of a detailed analytical mind. Can't get into it here, but the point is that as a school owner, you need a budget, i.e., what do I anticipate to do in the next year? What am I going to spend? What am I going to make? What am I going to spend in order to make that money? Right? But your job is to make sure you're looking at least 3 years out. You don't have to be perfect 3 years out, but you have to dedicate time and attention to envisioning your future 3 years out, because you can do far more than you anticipated in 3 years, and you'll never actually be accurate within 1 year. It's sort of like what's the quote you always give, Daniel? Like, you can achieve more than you anticipate in 5 years or 3 years, and you'll do less than your overly excited mind can actually do within 1 year. Something like that.
People overestimate what they can get done in 1 year. They underestimate what they can get done in 3 to 5.
Yes, totally. And your job is to have a vision for 3 to 5. So that's the final piece. And all I'll say is these reports all live in your annual planning workbook. They just get bumped over there. And then we work out of an annual planning workbook, one section of which is all these few beautiful reports that you've been maintaining, right? Your year-to-date health report, your budget versus actual, your historical income statement, your payroll report, and your future casting, your 1 and 3 year forecast. Those all live in an annual planning workbook, and then you're just flipping through pages. You're looking at your PDF online, and you're bumping back and forth and referencing dollar figures while you're also referencing things like student retention and all these other things that we teach in the forum to make sure that you come up with a more accurate vision for your school each year that you do annual planning. Every year it's going to get a little bit clearer.
And then the only other step is to go to Amazon and buy some mirrored sunglasses, because the future is going to be so bright if you do all this that you're going to need those sunglasses to prevent yourself from going blind.
Can I say one thing about this to close, Daniel, which
Sure.
is that the peace of mind getting this, for example, year-to-date report sent to me every week is worth every hour that I invested in designing it and setting it up, that I invested in creating the SOP to train the team to do it, that I have invested in my education. It's just incredibly valuable for you listeners to know that having clarity on your numbers each week, each month, and each quarter, and then getting to the end of the year and not feeling like it's this immense lift, but instead it's just building on what you've already been doing. The value there is, it's indescribable how much peace it'll bring your mind. Even when things are not going as planned, at least you've been looking at it regularly, so it's not a surprise to you. That's huge. So I strongly encourage you to take the time, block out 3 or 4 hours, get a couple of these reports working. If you have no idea how to use your QuickBooks Online, give yourself a 3-hour tutorial, subscribe to their academy, learn how to use the tool, get this budget versus actual, get your year-to-date health report going, and find that peace of mind.